Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Casey. Good morning, Paria.
Good morning.
Morning.
And welcome to episode 4 of Over the Binary. My name is Grace O'Connor, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, specializing in working with the transgender population as well as their families and loved ones. I am also a primary therapist at Westwind Recovery in West Hollywood, a dual diagnosis treatment center serving those suffering from the disease of addiction and mental health challenges. And I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Casey Weitzman. I'm the president and founder of Gender Wellness of Los Angeles, and I started it probably around 20 years ago. And obviously it's grown. Say in the last 5 years that the need has changed to very more youth, anywhere from the age of around 11 to 17 years old. And it's kind of a very exciting time for this population. And I thought, that's why I thought Paria would be a terrific guest for our podcast today. And that's why we're just so excited.
Why don't I introduce her? Why don't I give her, let's hear a little bit about Paria, if that's okay. Our guest today is Paria Hassouri. Paria is a pediatrician, mother of 3, writer and transgender rights activist. She graduated from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine in 1999 and completed her residency training at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation in 2002. Her personal essays have been published in multiple sites, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Huffington Post. And she has presented stories on stage through Expressing Motherhood. A proud Iranian American, she spent her formative years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She practices pediatrics at Cedars Sinai Medical Center, where she most recently started the Pediatric and Adolescent Gender Wellness Clinic. Her memoir, Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Her Child's Gender Change, was released in September 2020. So welcome, Paria.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be talking to both of you today.
We're honored to have you here.
Great. Grace and I have many specific questions to ask and topics that we're excited to introduce. But Paria, before we move forward, there may be some people watching or listening to this episode that may not be familiar with your story, particularly as it's revealed in your memoir, Found in Transition. I'd like to set the table, so to speak, by sharing with everyone a review of the book that, in addition to offering a great summary, it adequately delivers the praise it deserves. And it's from my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Weimer, the medical director of UCLA's Gender Health Program. Obviously, you know the quote, but for those out there, I just want to read it. And here it is: a brave, bare, humble, and honest portrayal of a mother coming to understand her child's experience. This much needed book gives voice to the common journey of bewildered parents trying to do right by their child, especially those supporting adolescents with gender dysphoria, disbelief, anxiety, protectiveness, uncertainty, and love. Found in Transition is also a great resource for medical professionals to help them understand the real experiences of families with transgender teens. Dr. Weimer has obviously treated a lot of our families, and what you wrote, obviously, has been the story of so many of the families that I've worked with. And what I love about the books is that any parent that reads this book feels such kinship to your story, because it's many of their stories as well. And I could tell the story, or Grace could tell the story, but we have not lived the experience that you have. So I'm appreciative, and I think so many parents are as well.
Thank you.
And I wonder, Paria, if you might be willing to share a little bit of your story about finding out how your child was trans and how you came to accept it and where you are today.
Yeah, so basically in May of 2017, my middle child, who was born designated male, at 13 and a half, told us that she is transgender. And at the time that she came out, I'd already been a practicing pediatrician for 15 years, and I was really completely blindsided by her coming out. I had never, ever, ever in my wildest dreams or nightmares or thoughts, or I don't know what you want to call them, ever thought that she might be transgender. The possibility of her being struck down by lightning was higher to me than the possibility of her being trans. That's how caught off guard I was. So I really didn't handle it so appropriately initially. I have some regrets about that, although I have been coming to terms with those. And so I went through initially anger, anger more than anything, because I thought this was an attention-seeking behavior and not actually true. Anger, denial, and then once denial wasn't an option, the worst grief I have ever been through. And then, eventual sort of acceptance and advocacy. And it's, when she came out, I thought I will never see her as a girl, like really see her as a girl. Yeah. I just couldn't see how that was going to ever happen. And now, 4 years later, I can't imagine her being like an adult male, I really can't. So I think, it took really a couple of years to really get there. And it continues to, evolve.
Yeah. And how do you feel your relationship with Ava has changed in the last 4 years?
I mean, I think our relationship is stronger and better than it's ever been, because she went from being a sad, unhappy person to a really happy, thriving young woman. Yeah. And so when somebody's really happy, then your relationship with them also is a lot better. And we are so much closer now than we've ever been. She's so much closer to her dad than she's ever been. I think as a quote unquote boy, there was like, I don't even know if it was the gender, but the depression that we kind of didn't know what it was about, just created this like disconnect where you feel like you don't know how to make your child thrive. And now it's who she is. Their relationship is so much better than it's ever been, and they my husband's like not a phone guy, but they like talk on the phone together regularly, while she's in college. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
That's so great.
Because one of the things you talk about in the book, which I think is very much like a lot of the kids we see at Gender Wellness, is around that this was your middle child, right? And there had been sort of issue after issue after issue as she was growing up. And some of these, I don't know if you would call it acting out behaviors, but it was like you said, like, now what? And so it sounds like, because this is what's happening in the families, like the child's acting out or getting bad grades or being really secretive. And then it's like years later, it's like, okay, now it's starting to make sense of why some of the things were happening. And you couldn't pinpoint it until they start to feel happier, or the parents are starting to listen more to what's gone on with the child overall. And then after you start to kind of pay attention and either psychologically or medically start to help them be more themselves, the grades start to change, and like you said, their outlook starts to change. They're feeling more comfortable in their bodies. Their friendships change. It's just, I've seen almost like a metamorphosis.
Yeah.
And so, and the parents, because they come in very much like how you did, like, this is not going to happen. No, you got to wait till you're 18. You have all these, because you don't know, right? That
Right.
but waiting till you're 18 is making a decision that can psychologically cause a lot of damage for the child, at least for the time that we're not doing anything.
Right. And
Mm.
I think when you've had a kid where it's always been like, okay, now what, now what, now what? And the kid moved from this thing to this thing to this thing. When they come out as trans, out of the blue to you as the parent, you think, well, this is just another episode of now what? And you don't take it seriously, rather than realizing, no, oh, now this is the actual answer of all those other now whats,
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to point out that the misperception, and I know you talk about this in your book as well, is that if they're not presenting in a gender that's not congruent with the one in which they were assigned at birth, that they can't be trans. They have to present by the age of 3, 4, or 5. That if they come out later, they can't be trans. That was an experience that you had as well. So you had to learn that people can come out as trans at 5 or 10 or 18 or 60 or 70. Everyone's different.
Right. And I think the other thing was, when she came out, I asked her, it would have been easier for me if she had said, well, I always had this, but I hid it, but I asked her, when did you first know? And she said, that it kind of, 6 months ago is when I started to realize this. And so I would keep grilling her, like, before 6 months ago, did you ever think I have had a gender issue? And she was like, no. And so, that was the hard part for me to wrap my head around, and what I've had to, she didn't know either. When you, and kind of coming to learn that, for some kids, if you are raised your entire life and everyone is telling you you're a boy, I mean, you just don't have, for some kids, they don't have that capacity, or they just don't ever question it,
Yeah,
so.
absolutely.
Right. And what I was going to say about that is, I don't know if this was your experience, but a lot of my parents were like, because a lot of kids will come out as like, I'm bisexual or I'm pansexual. And the parents like, well, I have to look it up, but okay. Or the parents will say, which I just really laugh, is like, can't my kid just be gay? Which I laugh as an older person where, being gay, I always say sometimes that being transgender is about 30 years behind being gay or lesbian. So the parents are like, hey, just be gay. Like, life would be so easy, especially if the person transitions and then, let's say, likes women. Like, you have to go through all this.
Right.
I don't know if that's been your experience with your patients, if it was how you felt about Ava. Like, why do you have to go through all this? Can't you just be this? I mean,
Right.
did you have any of that bargaining going on?
I definitely tried to convince her that she was just, she could just be gay and wear makeup for fun, like dress for fun, that she didn't have to, change genders or, names, or, and, just like accept that you're, you can be gay and have fun. And I purposely would take her to, like, I took her to the color run at West Hollywood because I wanted her to see like gay men, wearing tutus and makeup and,
Yes.
having fun. I tried, I really tried. And she was just like, but that's not who I am. So yeah, there was a lot of trying to bargain. And then I tried to bargain with her to be non-binary. I was like, well, why do you have to do anything like why can't you just be non-binary, or, wear what you want, use what name you want, but just not do anything, medically. And, she said to me, but saying that I'm non-binary would be omitting the fact that I'm a girl, and an omission is a lie. And I, put this, and when she said an omission is a lie, as a mother, you're just like, gosh, I guess I raised this kid too well, and I
Boy,
can't
talk about
ignore this.
integrity, huh?
Yeah.
Use this with me, right? It's like, you can't use, so sorry. You can't use that with me. You can't use how I raised you against me.
Right. So then I had to really listen. I had to just listen to what she was saying.
Now, also as a pediatrician with the families that you work with, right? I mean, you probably are also sort of like a clinician as far as having to hear these stories from the families, right? That they're also bargaining. And I don't know if you could just talk for a minute about what that's like when you meet the families for the first time. I mean, do you feel like you're also like a mental health professional for a while, or for the first couple sessions?
Definitely feel like I'm a mental health professional for the first couple of sessions, which I'm really not, qualified to be. And I think, but I know, where the parent's coming from. And the one thing now, being on the other side of it, is that I know if they've made that first appointment, things are gonna probably be okay. Like it might take a couple of appointments, it might take 5 appointments, but once they've gotten their foot in the door, I know it's probably gonna be okay. And so I really just try to meet them where they are, and provide just enough information to hopefully get them to, come back and keep, communicating with me. And that has been working pretty well for most people. So.
Right. And I was just going to say that I think that's the beauty of Cedars and Gender Wellness of Los Angeles, because we cross refer, right? The times when you say, okay, I want you to process, I want you to work with a clinician and then come back. Maybe do a couple months or a few weeks and then come back. And it's sort of the same thing, because the beauty is working in pediatrics, we can send someone that's, 11 years old or even younger, and knowing that you can really do a great assessment with someone really young, and talk a lot about, which is what we're going to go into next, about puberty blockers. I think Grace is going to start.
I want to ask about the book very briefly. I might have a question or two about the book, but there's also something that really struck me last night, Paria, when I was thinking about questions that I wanted to ask you. Is we always talk about the LGBTQ plus person coming out, but I think the family has their own coming out. And I'm curious, Casey and I actually talked about this last night, you coming out as the parent of a transgender child to your own family, to your mom and your siblings, and what that was like for you. And was there any shame that you feel you had to work through? We live in this binary system that says people are either men or women, and some cultures it's more restrictive than others. So gaining the understanding that gender is a spectrum, and that everybody winds up somewhere on that spectrum, is sometimes a really, really difficult thing for people to accept and tolerate. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I was really scared to tell my mother. I was really worried that she would think that I had done something wrong in my parenting to cause this. I hadn't given my child the attention she needed, something, that I had caused this. I was really worried that that was going to be her reaction. And I think my mom was the person I was most scared to tell. And fortunately, when I told my mom, she was I don't think she quite understood it, but her immediate reaction was like, Everything's going to be okay. We're going to like figure this out." And it wasn't, you caused this,
Yeah.
you did this. And with just her saying everything's going to be okay, it was like the greatest burden was lifted off of my shoulder, because I thought, if my mom can handle this, I really don't care about
What anybody else
anybody
says.
else and how
That's so
they
true.
handle this. And that also made me really sad, that I told my mom, she was accepting, and that lifted this great burden off of me. But when Ava told me, I didn't do that for Ava. you know um these are things that still give me goosebumps and chills and break my heart, really.
I hear that.
And for those in our audience that cannot see you but can hear you, I just want to let everyone out there that you are emotional right now and tearful. And sometimes I think that is our work with the parents about sort of forgiveness and kindness around the fact that, we do the best we can. And the part that we read in your book was around some of the discrimination and, I don't know, prejudice that you also had to go through as a young person. And, like I said, it is about forgiveness. And, the beautiful part is that you have come around and you have to do it in your time. And you also write about support groups and places that you went to do some of your healing and about giving back to the community. But you're right, it is a process, and it takes, just like you said, you meet the person where they are. So it takes as much time as it takes. And I really hate it when people say, well, you should be over it by now. It's like about that gentleness. And I know you do a lot of yoga and yoga retreats, and it's
Yeah.
just taking time to get there.
Family needs time to transition as well. The transgender person has the benefit of having known longer than most people. We're doing that process of exploring it, and I know Ava did a lot of that as well, her own research. And so when we come to the family might be in a complete state of shock, and they genuinely need time to transition as well.
Yeah.
So I'm very big on trying to give families space to spiritually, emotionally, mentally kind of wrap their brains around their child being a different gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why how I've changed my practice now is that I won't see any child before I meet with the parents alone, to really find out if they are supportive. And in most cases, the parents are like, I have many parents that will say, I don't want you to talk about gender dysphoria right now. I want you to talk about anxiety, depression. They don't understand that's a big cause of the dysphoria, but they sort of warn me, let's talk about everything else first. And, I will say that, how do you feel if this really is what it is? I said, I'm going to take time, but I want to be realistic. And then I say, I want to meet with the parents again, with the child or without the child. I try and do it with the child after about 6 or 8 weeks. So we can kind of get realistic, because sometimes we're thought of as gatekeepers, which I don't think is a bad thing. Grace and I have talked about this. Or we want to be supportive with giving good resources, where we're affirmative, but also realistic. Yeah. So Grace, what do you want to add to that?
I think, Casey, you want to speak about puberty blockers at some point. And but I also kind of wanted to come back to the book, if we could, which is Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Child's Gender Change, which was released in September of 2020, which is a wonderful book, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. And I try to have all my parents of my clients read the book. I tell them about it, try to get it on Amazon because I think it's so beautiful and so wonderfully written and so honest and compelling. So thank you for writing that and making
Thank
such a
you.
huge contribution to transgender literature and the transgender affirmative support that's so necessary. Thank you for doing that.
Well, I just want to say, I thank you so much. That means a lot to me coming from you. And, sometimes you'll hear things like, well, trans people should be writing, trans stories and, not like parents of trans kids or something like that. And I think one thing that one of my friends said to me that sort of resonated with me was, and she had a husband who died of cancer. And so she said, when her husband died of cancer, she didn't want to read like the words of the people dying. She wanted to read the words of their spouses and partners and how they were dealing with their, with their, partner's cancer. And so I kind of think of this as like, as a parent, when this happened to me, I didn't want to read the words of a trans person. I should have, but it wasn't where I was.
Right.
But I wanted to read the words of a parent who was experiencing, what I was. So I think everything has its, time and place. And after that, I was able to, once I went through this, then I was able to go and pick up, She's Not There and read that, and Sissy and other books. But where I was, this is, is what I needed. So I think, so it means a lot to me to have you guys and particularly Grace endorse the book. Thank you.
I love that. Love that.
And that's great, because a lot of times, Paria, which you have been generous enough to give me copies to give clients, which I assure you my pile is less. A lot of times the parents will say, I don't want to read that book. Like I'm not ready.
Right.
I offer it and they're like, I can't. But they know it's there. And that's all we can do. We can lead, we can lead our clients to the water, but we can't make them drink. But at least finally, I have a book or a few books to say, here they are when you're ready. Where obviously 20 years ago, there were no books. And honestly, there was really one doctor I referred people to and one surgeon. And fortunately, we have such an array of referrals and providers now that do this work. So again, there's so many things I want to talk about. I really, when I start to talk about puberty blockers, I've read Abigail Schreier's book. I know.
Yeah.
Right.
We could spend a whole session talking about, I actually had Jordan write a blog. We haven't printed it yet, but when I was thinking about today, I had her sort of not compare and contrast, but your book and her book. And when I mentioned it to both Jordan and Grace, they want to pull their hair out. But that kind of leads into puberty blockers, because for those that have read Abigail Schreier's controversial irreversible damage, which has been rightly criticized for its transphobic and often politically charged generalizations about transgender and non-binary individuals and their thoughts about puberty blockers. And if you want to comment about that, about the book, I wanted to kind of talk about the parents that we work with, that sometimes there are a tendency to jump into their thoughts or their misconceptions about what puberty blockers are and what they're not. So as a pediatrician, what criteria, because a lot of families sort of think, and they've read horror stories about how physicians and doctors just race in and give the puberty blockers, like after the first session. So I just wanted you to explain to our audience what criteria you use when you're working with transgender and non-binary youth. Like what criteria do they need to meet for you to feel comfortable prescribing puberty blockers and hormones?
Yeah, well, I think so. I'm more comfortable with the puberty blockers than hormones. As in I'm pretty comfortable with puberty blockers. So because puberty blockers are completely safe, completely reversible. They've been used for over 30 years for kids who have central, precocious puberty or early onset puberty. So we have lots of data and lots of experience with puberty blockers, and the effects are completely reversible versus, gender affirming hormone therapy. There are some irreversible effects. Yeah. But, one thing is you don't block puberty until puberty starts. So that's like the most important criteria. So I think sometimes people think that puberty blockers are being used in, little kids. So, depending on if somebody is born with ovaries or born with testicles, the range at which they start puberty is different. But, bodies that are born with ovaries may start puberty as early as 7 or 8, and bodies that are born with testicles may not start puberty until they're 14. So there isn't an age. There's you actually start puberty, and once your body has started puberty, which is we look at sexual maturity rating, that's the earliest puberty blockers are done. So that's an absolute criteria. You can't do it unless they've actually started puberty. Other criteria is, we look at the DSM-5 criteria for gender dysphoria, and you have to meet those. So, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with doing puberty blockers if are at least in a Tanner or sexually mature, rating 2, and meet criteria for gender dysphoria, and you have family support, and you have ideally are working with a therapist too, although I won't actually make that an absolute requirement to not delay their care, like get multiple things started, at one time, especially because it can take a couple months to get authorization and scheduling and all those, and we can, set up therapy in the meantime. So I think, so puberty blockers are completely safe and reversible. And so I, if I really feel like this child meets criteria for gender dysphoria, has actually started puberty, has the support in place to be able to do this, then we do it. And it buys everybody time to just put a pause on things, and be able to explore their gender further with, a therapist who's trained, in doing this. And it buys you at least 2 years, for sure. Yeah. So I think, then, providing gender affirming hormone therapy is a little different, because you are going to have some effects that are irreversible without, surgery or, other things. For example, breast tissue growth is going to be irreversible, or doing testosterone and having, facial hair growth, you're going to need electrolysis, to get rid of it if you don't want it. So, so that, I think it's still sort of the same, some of the same things. Like, obviously you have to be a little bit older to do that. I don't put like a definite age on it, but you have to be at least 13 or 14. And you have to meet, again, DSM-5 criteria for gender dysphoria. And that's something where I really, really prefer that they definitely already have a gender therapist in place before we start. Whereas with the puberty blocker, I feel more comfortable doing that before, if I mean, most of the time there is a therapist involved, but if there isn't, I feel more comfortable proceeding with getting the process started for putting the pause. And sometimes you have these parents who say, well, they've had this kid that they've supported and the kid is doing great. So they don't really know why they need to go to a therapist
Right.
to start hormone therapy. And I'm just like, because when you start hormone therapy, I mean, things are going to come up
Boy, will they ever.
non-medically that I'm
Mhm.
not a therapist, just because things are great now doesn't mean that there isn't going to be challenges and frustrations and ups and downs with starting hormone therapy. And I'm not equipped to help you with that. I can help you with the medical part, but I'm not, a trained therapist and,
Yeah.
and I can't spend an hour with you weekly. And I'm great that things are going well right now and you don't feel like you need this, but things are probably going to come up through this process.
Well, maybe we should all do a talk at WPATH, because one of the things I've complained about forever is that the physicians sort of see themselves as up here and therapists are down here. And what I try and say is, yeah, you can give the medicine or you can do the surgeries, but you don't understand. We get them when they come home. And it's like, if you didn't plan on, okay, so how are you going to make a living? How are you going to deal with discrimination? What's going to happen, in your personal life, in your marriage or relationships? The physicians kind of feel like, I did my job, go out there and good luck to you. And our part is like, well, if you weren't happy before the surgery, you're probably not going to be happy after the surgery, because we're talking about the body, but still the mind. So, like I said, I'm just so thrilled to hear your sort of compassion and empathy that this is not your area of expertise. So the collaboration is something that I've watched that there's not enough of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a couple minutes left, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, Paria, was fertility preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And how strenuously do you advocate for fertility preservation with your clients?
Yeah, I think it depends on what age and tanner stage they are when they're getting to me. So I think, if I have designated male at birth who is already producing sperm, then I really try to get them to seriously consider preserving sperm, if they can. For some people, that's just too distressing. And so, they don't. And then if you have somebody who's designated female at birth and is, already ovulating, I mean, trying to freeze eggs is just it's just way too distressing. So I mention it as an option, but I also say that, and you see the kids like, freeze, just be horrified at the thought of it. But I want to be honest. And so I tell the parents, this is an option. Most people don't do this because it's just way too distressing. And then, you have the ones who have been blocked early and you're going to go to cross hormones. And so fertility preservation is not possible. And this is the conversation that I try to, because I think make sure that the parent, understands that we are trading fertility preservation for, an external presentation that matches their child's gender identity, much better. And that this is a difficult decision, as a parent to make, but, most people decide to not do fertility, preservation and go from blocking to cross hormones. But I think starting to have those conversations like early, like as soon as we do the puberty blocker, I really talk about fertility so that they have 2-3 years to get used to this idea that their child's fertility may not be preserved. when we go from blocker to cross hormones in the future. Because if they're prepared for that, and it's not, like after 2-3 years, it's not like, okay, now we're going to go to cross hormones, but guess what? Your kid is probably not going to be able to have biological children.
Right.
It's like, wait, so I make sure that's a conversation that starts as soon as we're talking about blockers.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that, because we try too. And then one of my kids, just to end this part, is the parents like, we're not starting until we talk about fertility. And I'm like, okay, let's get this going if this is the only thing that's holding you back. So, there's always that bargaining that parents have. So it's great to, again, hear what you're saying, that we have to be realistic and get get everybody on board.
Yeah.
Well, Casey, I don't know. I think we're kind of right at that time. Unless you have any other questions, Casey, that you wanted to ask Paria before we wrap.
No, I just want to give Paria a chance if there's anything else she wants to tell our huge audience out there, millions of people. But I am hoping that families and that are not educated, if there's anything else that you think people should know before we stop.
No, I think what I try to tell everybody is, don't be afraid of making that first appointment, because the first appointment is just like gathering of information and providing resources. There's no physical exams, there's no blood tests, it's literally just a conversation, and information is, power, and it gives you, time to process. So I think, just not being afraid to make that first appointment. And then, as a parent, because I'm a, parent and a mother before I'm anything else, it's gonna be okay. If your child has your support, it's gonna be okay. And what you think you cannot accept, you more than will with time. And what you think might be the worst thing, that's happened to you could end up being an incredibly, in life enriching journey for you and your family. So just open mind, open heart. It's, it's going to be okay.
It sounds like that's the journey you've been on, Paria, as well.
Yes.
I just want to show the book, Found in Transition, by Paria Hassouri. And Paria, just how can people get in touch with you? What's the way that they can reach you?
Yeah, they can. If they just like personal, questions or book or anything like that, my website, pariahassouri.com, has a contact me page, and they can email me that way. If they're interested in the Cedars Clinic, then you can just look up the Cedars Clinic and find me that way. So.
Well, excellent. Again, we are so grateful that we could meet with you today. So thank you so much. Grace, anything, would you like to say goodbye?
Thank you for being an advocate. Thank you for being an ally. You're doing such great work. Thank you. And this has been Over the Binary with Casey and Grace. And thank you again, Paria, for coming in and visiting with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.